Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami. Dhammang saranang gacchami. Sanghang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami. So welcome to tonight's Dharma talk. I guess the title of tonight's Dharma talk is Impermanence, Dispassion, Cessation, and Letting Go. And as I mentioned earlier, I invite you to hold on to your questions until we come back after soup and supper for discussion time. And just to remind you, people online, if you're online, please turn off your microphones while I'm giving the Dharma talk, and at least while we're in recording. So in this talk, I'd like to address the fourth tetrad of the 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing, and as it's described by the Buddha. And though in this talk I'll be talking about absolute awakening, like the realization in nirvana, I just want to remind you that what we're talking about here is a map, is steps to the reduction of suffering as well. We'll be talking about how these 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing can lead to full awakening, but yet they can also lead to a kind of a relative awakening, awakening to various patterns that we might have in our relative existence that lead to suffering. And in doing so, we're using these 16 steps as a template and a map to reduce suffering, even at a relative level. So, as you know, these 4 tetrads of the 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing align with the 4 establishments of mindfulness. The first tetrad aligns with mindfulness of body. The second tetrad aligns with feeling tones. The third tetrad aligns with heart-mind or mind. And the fourth tetrad, what we're talking about tonight, aligns with dhammas or phenomena. And during this talk, I'll be talking about the fourth tetrad, and I'll also include reference to what's called the 5 aggregates, or khandha in Pali, and these include body and mind, which we call self, and these are form, feelings, feeling tones, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. And some of you are familiar with these ideas because we've been talking about them previously in previous talks. So here are the steps of the fourth tetrad as described in the sutta. One trains, contemplating impermanence, I shall breathe in. One trains, contemplating impermanence, I shall breathe out. One trains, contemplating dispassion, I shall breathe in. One trains, contemplating dispassion, I shall breathe out. One trains, contemplating cessation, I shall breathe in. One trains, contemplating cessation, I shall breathe out. One trains, contemplating letting go, I shall breathe in. One trains, contemplating letting go, I shall breathe out. And I just want to make a note here. Previously, I've been talking about experiencing samadhi, experiencing letting go, experiencing liberation of mind and so on for all the tetrads, for all the steps. Now we're talking about contemplating. It's interesting that that word contemplating is used in the 4 establishments of mindfulness as well. The 4 establishments of mindfulness are very much insight oriented. And so this 4th tetrad is also about insight, is also insight oriented, and it's using this term contemplating, which I understand as seeing along with this experience, tracking experience. You're contemplating it. It's not like you're thinking about it, although sometimes that might happen, but it's more like seeing along with these experiences and having a direct experience of impermanence and so on. So let's begin with the step 13. And thus far, we've been utilizing aspects of both the cultivation of serenity or tranquility and insight. And I've been talking about how these 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing are a co-joining of these 2 approaches to these 2 aspects of meditation. When we're coming to the 4th tetrad, it's completely insight-based. It's all about insight because we need insight to wake up. Serenity is very powerful. It gives us the tool to be able to see clearly, to focus, to have that power of concentration. Yet we need insight to wake up. And unlike serenity meditations, where there's usually a focus on a unified direction, it's kind of like, a unified direction, and there is absorption. With insight, the objects can change. And we're tending to cause-effect relationships, as demonstrated in dependent arising. We're looking at conditionality. In addition, we're focusing on the nature of experiences, such as their universal characteristics of existence. Anicca, dukkha, anatta. Anicca referring to impermanence, dukkha referring to unsatisfactoriness. It's not possible to find satisfaction in changing things. And anatta referring to not self, that there's no individual entity or thing you can find in this experience. Everything is impermanent and everything is not self. And one way we can think about not self, and I'll explain this a little bit more as we move through the talk, it is that we can't thingify experience. And as you've heard us mention several times on this retreat, and I'm borrowing this phrase from Lee Brasington, everything, there is just streams of dependently arising processes interacting. It's all just a process. We can't thingify anything. So a feature of insight meditation is being mindful of the 3 universal characteristics or marks of existence, anicca, dukkha, anatta. And insight meditation is directed at being attentive to and directly experiencing these 3 characteristics. And when we do, we develop insight. Many of you know about the Satipatthana practice or the establishments of mindfulness practice. And in that practice, there's an equal balance, and maybe there's even an inclination to attend to these 3 characteristics on an equal way, like we're attending to impermanence, we're also attending to not self, we're also attending to dukkha. What's interesting in the mindfulness of breathing practice is that the focus is on impermanence. And there's in the whole practice, there's very little mention of dukkha. But we start to look at dukkha now in this 4th tetrad. So in this tetrad, anicca is the focus, anicca or impermanence or change. As a characteristic of existence, dukkha generally refers to unsatisfactoriness because we can't find anything satisfying, anything we can't find enduring happiness in that which is impermanent. And because we can't find enduring happiness in that which changes, because it changes. And this characteristic is also understood as unreliability and uncertainty. Anatta, or not self, in Theravadan Buddhism anyway, it's closely synonymous with emptiness. There's a few minor distinctions between it. Yet emptiness, or not self, refers to how no single entity or thing can be found in conditioned experience. And in reference to emptiness, sometimes it also means absence. And like in this hall, in this room we're in, it's absent of elephants. It's empty of elephants. It's kind of a reference point. That's the kind of, there's something that in another sutta that the Buddha talks about emptiness, when he, actually the Chula Shunyata Sutta, which is the shorter discourse on emptiness, the Buddha refers to things being empty of other things, like progressively emptier and emptier. So this room is empty of elephants, or empty of vehicles, it's empty of supermarkets and so on. So there's this sense of, there's a graded sense of emptiness, but I won't talk a lot about emptiness right now. When with insight meditation, we have insight to one characteristic, it generalizes to insight into the other two. For example, if one can see impermanence in one experience, one can see emptiness, or not self, and dukkha, nature of that experience also. The same generalizing feature is also extended to different experiences. For example, noticing the impermanence of a falling leaf. And noticing that, it can be generalized to understanding the impermanent nature of some destructive thoughts or painful emotions. So we can see the, following on from seeing impermanence of a thought, we can also see its unreliability. Like, it's not a fact to be believed because it's unreliable, and the empty nature of that thought. And as also mentioned in a previous talk, actually the talk we gave last night, I think it was last night. Was it last night? Yes, it was. About, self-conceiting, the conceit I am. When we cling to and identify with something like simple as self-concepts, and we cling to that self-concept as who and what we are, as I, mine, and myself, and we identify with it, there's suffering. However, if we can see the impermanent nature of our various self-concepts, we can also begin to understand the emptiness of them and the futility in clinging to those self-concepts, which the self-concepts, for those online, I've been referring to as the self-conceiving nature of, it's a hindrance, it's this conceiving of a self, making a story of ourselves, making this fiction of ourselves, and clinging to it. It's a lot of suffering. And it's a hindrance to awakening. Not only a hindrance, sorry, it's a feta to awakening. So when we can see the impermanent nature of things and the futility of clinging to them, we begin to be more inclined to let them go. And we experience a freedom from this type of dukkha. So mindfulness of breathing emphasizes impermanence, which is the theme and the focus of the 13th step. And there's a variety of ways we can be aware of or contemplate impermanence. And in life, we have an opportunity with every waking moment. It's not easy, but it's quite present for us every moment. Right now, you can see the impermanence. You can hear the impermanence in this talk. You can see the impermanence in I'm getting older. Maybe you can see that in my face. You can see the impermanence of everything. Everything is arising and passing away. And walking meditation is a wonderful time to see the constant flow of experience. And with mindfulness of breathing, possibly the most obvious example of this, in the first two steps anyway, is to perceive the rising and falling, or directly experience, sorry, I should say, the rising and falling of each breath, as we noted, in the middle, the beginning, middle, and end of each breath. We can experience this in our whole body, expanding and contracting. We can experience in the rising, falling of our abdomen as we breathe through our abdomen or our chest. And we can experience it as we're breathing through our nose and the subtle sensations of the in and out breath. It's quite powerful to see this when you start to become very focused and you just notice these arisings of sensations, arising and passing, rising, passing, rising, passing. And that can become extraordinarily refined. And Analia cites another sutta where we become aware of the 5 aggregates in relationship to the breathing, and seeing the impermanence of each aggregate and the self that they collectively represent. Now, the 5 aggregates are 5 groups of experience that are usually called the self. We hold on to these separate groups of experience and we call them a self. And these 5 groups are, and you remember this from when I was talking about the functions of mind, because some of them are functions of mind as well. These 5 groups are form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations or volitional creations, and consciousness. In Pali, Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana. So we talked about these a little bit on a previous talk, and I'll just remind you. Rupa, or form, represents the 4 great elements: earth, water, fire, and wind. These 4 elements represent body. So earth element is experienced internally as hardness and softness, roughness and smoothness, heaviness and lightness, and a sense of solidity. This earth element. If you push your tongue up against your teeth, you're experiencing hardness. That's earth element. If you feel the hardness beneath your buttocks as you're sitting on the cushion or chair, that's earth element. Water element represents that which flows and a sense of cohesion. What I mean by cohesion is that moisture holds things together. And imagine you're picking up some moist sand, wet, and it's it's not running, but it's a moist sand. It's like you're making a sandcastle out of this moist sand, and you put it together, you make it into a ball or even a little small castle. What's holding it together is water element. If there's no water element, it will just, become sand, dry sand, and fall apart. So this is one function of water element. And it's also that which we experience directly as viscosity, or slipperiness, or stickiness, or dryness. And the other day, I invited you to put your hands together like this, and you might feel some stickiness in your hand, or you might feel some dryness, like I can feel sort of dryness at the top of my hand, for example. That's water element. And fire element refers to temperature. And perhaps your face may feel a little bit cooler than your body inside a jumper or wrapped up in blankets. It's this experience of warmth or hot to cool or cold. We can directly experience fire element. And wind element is experienced as movement, stretching, or tingling energy. For example, if we're doing Tai Chi, we might experience this energy flow down our arms and so on. It's like, and if we're breathing with the abdomen, as another example, what we're experiencing is air element, also called wind element, this stretching and contraction. And we're just tracking. When we look closely, we can't find anything that's permanent and lasting and controllable in this experience of the body. There's nothing we can call a solid self within that. The next aggregate, or khanda in Pali, for those who are familiar with that, is feeling tones, Vedana. Remember the other night I stuck up my little finger and I said feeling tones? Remember that one? And feeling tones refer to the qualities of pleasantness, unpleasantness, or neither. And feeling tone moves us to act. It moves us. And in that respect, it's sometimes it's called affective, although some teachers go, no, it's definitely not related to emotions. It's definitely not related to emotions. It's related to mind. So anyway, because emotions can be felt in the body, but it's like emotions move us to act in some ways. Feeling tones also move us. If we're having pleasant feeling tones, we're moved to grasp after what's pleasant. We're moved to hold on to it. We're moved to have it. If we're feeling unpleasant feeling tones, we're moved to push it away. So that movement towards grasping after is sometimes called craving for the pleasant. And that movement to push away with aversion is sometimes called, it's called aversion, but it's craving to push away, if that makes sense. These feeling tones come and go, and they arise because of causes and conditions. We can't say, I don't want a feeling tone to arise. It will arise because it's conditioned to arise. We can't find a self in these feeling tones. They're like wind blowing around, you know, sometimes a pleasant tone, sometimes an unpleasant tone, sometimes a neither pleasant or unpleasant tone. The next aggregate is perceptions. And as I explained the other night, perceptions are the way we recognize something. It's called sanya in Pali. And sanya sometimes refers to memory. Of course, we have a memory of things like first time I saw a computer, it would have looked strange. Next time I saw a computer, I recognized it as a computer. And you know, thereafter, I'm perceiving computers as computers. And then I saw a laptop. I'm perceiving a laptop as a laptop. There's this perception, it's a concept that I place onto things. It's interesting, like, just like we can't really control or have an influence on our feeling tones, but we can have an influence on our perceptions. We can project our opinions and our views and our attitudes onto what we perceive. Like what looks really beautiful for one person can look ugly to another person. What we perceive is dependent on causes and conditions. And the way we see it, the way we perceive things is dependent on causes and conditions. And we can have an influence on how we perceive. Sometimes we can project a twisted perception onto things. The fourth aggregate, remember that? Some people are smiling. The other day, we called the middle finger volitional creations or mental formations. That's the creative aspect of our mind. And this is how we create our worlds and our self-concepts This is, there's so much in this. We perceive something. Perception's the original concept of something. And then we can mentally proliferate. We can engage in papancha. Remember papancha? Mental proliferation. That can happen sometimes, but other times it's not proliferating, but it's just this creative aspect, like creating the plans for this lovely room, for example. Now, the fifth aggregate is called consciousness. So it's a little bit of a different way of understanding this from the 5 functions of the mind. We're talking about the self, the 5 khandha, and the fifth aggregate of consciousness I explained the other night as the knowing quality of the mind. And in this respect, it doesn't have an influence on things like Vedana or like feeling tones. Feeling tones don't have an influence on things other than maybe triggering us to lead into craving or something like that. But here, consciousness is like a mirror, and everything in it, everything is conscious, everything, it's like a mirror of what we're experiencing. And as a mirror, it changes depending on what we're experiencing. So it's constantly changing. Our consciousness is also constantly changing. So in one sutta, the Buddha compared the aggregates to 5 different phenomena. And I'm going to try and read this. Sometimes I get a bit dyslexic when I read, but I hope you can tolerate me. Form or body or rupa was compared to a blob of foam formed in a river. And this is what he said. Monastics, he actually said monks, but I'm going to make it into gender neutral. Monastics, suppose that a large blob of foam were floating down this Ganges river, and a man with good eyes, or a man, woman, or a person, yeah, thank you. And a person with good eyesight were to see it, observe it, and appropriately examine it. To them, seeing it, observing it, and appropriately examining it, it would appear empty, void, without substance. For what substance could there be in a glob of foam? In the same way, a monastic sees, observes, and appropriately examines any form that is past, present, future, internal or external, blatant or subtle, common or sublime, far and near. To him, her, or them, seeing it, observing it, and appropriately examining it, it would appear empty, void, without substance. For what substance would there be in foam? That's for the body, that's rupa. For feeling tones, he said the same thing, except it's about as raindrops falling into some water, like a lake or a river even. These large raindrops falling on a body of water. Now suppose that in autumn, when it is raining in fat, heavy drops, a water bubble were to appear and disappear on that water. And a person with good eyesight were to see it, observe it, and so on. He compared sanya or perceptions to like a mirage. You know how a mirage looks like something, but when you get close, it disappears. And he compared sankhara or volitional formations or mental formations to like a banana tree. You cut into the banana tree or you peel the layers of the banana tree trying to get to a core central thing, and it's just, there's no core. And vijnana or consciousness to a magician's or conjurer's trick. Pretty cool, pretty cool. So when I was a young monk in Thailand, nearly about 47 years ago, a long time ago, or 48 years ago, I think, now, I was quite ill. The first year I was there, I got malaria, and that was really horrible. I thought I was going to die. And then I survived that. And then like about maybe 6 months later, I got hepatitis A. I was really, really sick. Actually, it was a bit longer. It was about 9 months later. I was really sick. I found it very difficult to meditate, especially on mindfulness of breathing. If I was doing mindfulness of breathing, I'd be distracted about how my body was rocking backwards and forwards with my heartbeat, because I was very skinny. I was sitting there going like this. I found it difficult to concentrate. However, what I did find easier to focus on was the 5 recollections. I'm of the nature to age. I'm of the nature to have illness. I'm of the nature to die. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, shall one day be parted from me. I am the owner of my actions, heir to my actions, born of my actions, related to my actions, abide supported by my actions. Whatever actions I shall do, of those actions I shall be the heir. So I was doing that contemplation a lot. Then I started to focus on death. And I kind of then went into reflections on death, because maybe I wouldn't survive. Maybe I'd never see Australia again. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And then one day, I thought to myself, what is it that dies? What is it? And I started to contemplate. And I knew about the 5 khandha, or the 5 aggregates. So I started to investigate each of these khandha, each of these aggregates, investigating body, looking into feelings, looking into perceptions, looking into sankhara, looking into consciousness. And I couldn't find a self anywhere. And I came to this conclusion that it's all just arising and passing. So all these khandha, all these aggregates are just arising and passing. And it gave me a lot of peace, actually. It was really, it helped me with equanimity. And I would call this equanimity close to what is called dispassion. When we can become aware of impermanence, in many ways, with any experience, when we can do that, when we become aware of its temporary nature or its impermanence, we often attend to the arising of new experiences. That's the tendency. However, and this is pleasant, sometimes I was talking about this earlier, like a brand new day. One door closes, another door opens. It's so wonderful. The next meal, the next, impermanent, I love this, the next sensation. It can be exciting for some people. However, if we begin to contemplate the passing away of experience, this passing away, we begin to develop what I would say is called dispassion, or a sense of disenchantment with that piece of chocolate, for example. I had 4 pieces of chocolate this afternoon. I was a little bit greedy, but it was very nice. I noticed the taste I used to have this as a monk. My teacher used to look at me, and I think he used to pity me and say, they used to call me Come in Thailand, because they couldn't say Malcolm very well, so it's Come. And it was interesting, my teacher would say, Come. Because he would receive chocolate, because the type of chocolate didn't have milk in it. And he could eat chocolate in the evening. It was called a medicine. He'd say, Come. Yes. And he'd give me a whole bar of chocolate. I think he saw how skinny I was, and he kind of wanted to fatten me up a bit. So he'd also give me food. Like, I'd be sitting there for the 1 meal a day. And you see this, he'd call the summoner up, a novice up, and say, give this to Malcolm, go and go. He'd be giving me all sorts of treats and so on. Anyway, this chocolate, I used to think, oh, thank you. And I take it back to my hut. I was staying in a cave at the time. Take it back to the cave. I'd be looking at it. And I'd take this chocolate. It was so nice. And then it'd finish. And I'd want another one. So I'd have another piece. It was very hard to stop. Anyway, when we can see the impermanence of things, there's a fading away of craving about it, because we have a disenchantment with this experience. We develop a sense of disenchantment. And this fading away of the craving is called dispassion, which is, in fact, a fading away of craving for experience. And dispassion is the next step, the 14th step, the 14th step in the 16 steps of mindfulness breathing. And then it's kind of like in this step of contemplating impermanence and also beginning to see dispassion, we begin to contemplate the dukkha nature of experience. I know it's not mentioned much in this sutta, in this practice, but we begin to see the dukkha nature of it. Maybe not the gross dukkha, but the subtle dukkha, the subtle unsatisfactoriness. And so it encourages us, well, it leads us to this dispassion, which is a fading away of craving. Whether it be craving for sensual pleasures, and there's 3 types of cravings: craving for sensual pleasures, like the pleasures of sight, sound, smell, touch, taste, and mind. Whether it be the craving to be somebody. This is a particular type of craving. It's about, I want to be somebody. And we kind of grasp onto this idea of existence and being somebody. And it's also fading away of the craving to not be anybody, which is another way of saying aversion. And its extreme end, the desire to suicide, for example, is a craving not to be. I just want to shut it out. I just don't want to have it anymore. We think it's like, we just want to turn it off. I can't stand it anymore. Switch it off. I mean, that's at the gross end, this suicidality. But at a subtle end, it's like, some of you heard me use this description. It's like, sometimes my partner says to me, I've had enough of today. I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to bed. See ya. That's all right. Good night, sweetie. So what happens when we start to see the impermanence? The object of craving no longer holds its allure. If it's aversion, it no longer has the rage or the rejection or the pushing away. And if it's the pleasant experience, we no longer have this allure, this yearning for it. And I see it as a kind of an experience of equanimity, but it's a little bit deeper than that. It's just this letting go. It's not quite a letting go yet, but it's a dispassion. And there's an increased sense of peace in this step. Yet the resolve for nibbana grows stronger. And this becomes the only meaningful direction. And in this way, craving and grasping and clinging begin to drop away, but there's a wholesome desire. You don't hear about this much in often the Western interpretations of Buddhism, or the Western insight approaches, for example, to understanding the practice. But there's something called, and you'll probably remember this name because it's an Australian way of saying something, chanda. In Pali, it's called chanda. And it means a kind of wholesome desire. Like most of you, I think you all probably had a very wholesome desire to come to this retreat. It's not necessarily a pleasant thing. You're not really craving for it, but you have a wholesome yearning, which is chanda. So what happens here is dispassion leads on to cessation. And cessation is the 15th step. In Buddhism, sometimes nirodha, or cessation, signifies an attainment before nibbana. Actually, it's considered as a step before Nibbana. And sometimes it means the perceptions, bodily experience, sankhara, mental formations stop, and even consciousness stops. And one teacher that I know called Stephen Snyder, he describes it as a lights out moment, a power outage experience, a nothing. It's like everything shuts down, including consciousness. And I remember I have people don't, I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning his name, but there's a dear friend of ours called Malcolm, who was on retreat with John Hale in Burma we were on the same retreat, but I was somewhere else. And myself and Patrick in the town, Chemiekta. And John and Malcolm were meditating in the same hut, and they had a curtain divide between them. I can't remember the name of the temple out in the outskirts, but Morbi, thank you. And Malcolm was talking to me about meditating with John. And he said he walked in and he looked in through the curtains and it looked like John was dead. And he didn't move. I don't know for how long, but he just didn't move. And Malcolm wasn't sure, but he just kind of let it go like that. And later he realized it was cessation, just lights out. And I do remember catching the plane back from Rangoon to Bangkok with John. I was sitting next to him and he came and stayed the night with my ex-brother-in-law's place that night. And he said to me, "Things are different. Everything's different." So I don't know. I mean, he didn't say, "Oh, I've experienced nirvana." You wouldn't say that. And he didn't say to me, "Oh, I had a cessation experience," or non-experience. But something happened, something shifted. So coming back to cessation, there are also different ways of considering cessation. In fact, there's 11 types of cessation. And I'm going to talk about dependent arising here. And I've talked about dependent arising earlier. And the way I talked about it was in relationship to the four truths. There's suffering, there's a cause of suffering, there's freedom from suffering, and a way to be free. And it's like when we have craving, we're going to have suffering. When we don't have craving and we're walking on the path, or we practicing the Eightfold Path, where there's no craving, we have freedom from craving. We have freedom. So the phrase that comes from the sutras that explains this very complex principle of dependent arising is like this: when this is, that is. With the arising of this, that arises. When this is not, that is not. When this ceases, that ceases. And so this kind of explains, when we have craving, we're going to have suffering. When we have no craving, we don't have suffering. In other words, we experience freedom from suffering. And often dependent arising is also considered as 12 steps. Or 12, not 12 steps, 12 links. No. I wrote in my script here, steps. I think I'm too much writing about the steps of mindfulness of breathing. 12 links, where one link conditions the next link and conditions the next link. And I mentioned these 12 links the other night, but I was incorrect and I missed one of the links out. But these are the links. And well, let's start. It's kind of like a cycle. So let's start with ignorance or delusion. So delusion conditions volitional formations or mental formations, but volitional formations here. Volitional formations conditions consciousness. Consciousness conditions name and form. We've talked about Nama and Rupa before. I won't go into great details about what that is. Name and form conditions 6 sense spheres: sight, sound, smell, touch, taste, and mind. 6 sense spheres conditions feeling tone. It's either pleasant, not pleasant, or neither. Feeling tone conditions craving, the grasping after things. It's not just the grasping after things, this insistence on having what we're craving for, or pushing away what we're craving for. Craving conditions clinging or grasping and grasping. Clinging conditions becoming. Becoming conditions birth. Birth conditions aging, sorrow, death, lamentation, despair, and a whole mass of suffering. And death. And death leads on to ignorance. If we still have this kind of, if we still have craving and so on. However, this cycle can be reversed. It goes back. And it sort of goes like this. If ignorance comes to an end, if it ceases, then volitional formations also cease. With the ceasing of volitional formations, consciousness ceases. With the consciousness ceases, name and form cease. When that ceases, the 6 sense spaces cease. When the 6 sense spaces cease, did I mention contact before? No. Contact ceases. When contact ceases, feelings cease, or feeling tone ceases. When feeling tone ceases, craving ceases. With craving ceases, clinging and grasping cease. With clinging and grasping cease, becoming and existence cease. When becoming or existence ceases, birth ceases. And when birth ceases, aging, sickness, death, sorrow, lamentation, and despair, pain, getting what we don't want, not getting what we want, being parted from what we hold dear. In fact, the whole mass of suffering ceases. The whole clinging to this, these various aggregates as a self ceases. So, at a very fundamental level, this cessation step means that all experiences come to an end. And when we don't feed into something, it ceases. And with this step, we let conditioned experiences come to their natural ending without grasping on for more. Because of the fading away of craving in a previous step, when something arises, it arises and it ceases, that ceases, we don't crave to have it more. There's craving, no craving there. And this inclines us to nibbana, the ultimate letting go. In practice, we are aware of the ceasing of experiences. And this leads us to the next step, the final step of the 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing. Letting go. And I heard once a talk by Sumedho. Many of you will know Sumedho. He's quite an elderly monastic. I think he's 93 now. He's living in Thailand now. I've actually massaged Sumedho. I don't know if you can remember it. But he was like, I was talking to him. I was giving him a massage. He came to Sydney. And I'd returned from being a monastic. I didn't meet him in Thailand. And Prakandipalo said, Malcolm, go and give Samedo a massage. He's up what Buddarungsi in Sydney. So I went out there and gave him a massage. And I was just massaging him. And I said, I was giving him that because I was a professional masseuse and shiatsu therapist. And I said, is this pleasant? Yes, it's pleasant. Pleasant sensations arising. And then he kind of, as I was massaging, he kind of sat up and he said, I'm nearly 50. I'm going to die soon. You know, he's such a interesting teacher. So anyway, he once said, I've listened to a number of Dharma talks given by him, and one day he said, he summarized the Eightfold Path into 2 words: letting go. Letting go. And if craving and grasping and clinging are key links in the cycles of suffering, then releasing these patterns incline us towards freedom and nibbana. In practice, it means we simply let go. Whatever we hold on to or been holding on to, we release it. And I'm just reminding you, this relates to our relative practice of the 16 steps of mindfulness of breathing. We may not be realizing cessation like I described with Stephen Snyder or John Hale, or even cessation of craving and ignorance and so on. But we might be experiencing a cessation of a particular unwholesome pattern that we have in our lives. And what happens at this step on a relative level is just letting it go, letting go of that pattern so it doesn't arise anymore. And this step is the culmination of all that which has proceeded in these 16 steps of mindfulness and breathing. It's the culmination of the 7 factors of awakening: mindfulness, investigation of dhammas, energy, joy or piety. I was reminded by Michael this afternoon, it's actually called piety in Pali. Tranquility, concentration or samadhi, and equanimity, as well as the practices that we did, and including the practices that we're doing in the contemplations we're doing in this last tetrad. And it is a letting go of everything that we're holding on to. When we can let go of patterns and tendencies leading towards dukkha, we realize nibbana. Nibbana is the result of exiting the cycles of samsara, so we're no longer being bound by tendencies associated with craving, clinging, hostility, and delusion. Sometimes practitioners talk about cessation as being the final release. However, with cessation, that's step 15, there can still be a subtle self thinking, I've accomplished cessation. And they think, I've woken up completely. I have achieved cessation. However, letting go involves a complete relinquishment, a complete letting go. Cessation is like closing the door, as I mentioned this afternoon. Cessation is like closing a door. I'm not opening, I'm not doing anything. I'm just closing the door on these patterns of existence and becoming. And letting go, this last step, is locking the door. Clinging to a self that will not last leads to suffering. Inclining towards that which is unborn or the unconditioned, however, can provide a freedom beyond that which language is able to describe. The purity of an awakened heart refers to how awareness is no longer obscured by the mental distortions and afflictions of the kilesa. The kilesa, I mentioned this the other night, they're mental distortions, basically, driven by greed, ignorance, and hatred. And according to all Buddhist traditions, awakened ones are completely free from mental afflictions. When there's no cause for suffering, suffering does not arise. Thus, the awakened ones are completely free from mental suffering. On that, excuse me. And on that note, we come to the conclusion of our series of talks on the Buddha's 16 steps of mindfulness breathing in its relationship to the teachings of the Buddha. And if I've misquoted anyone or misconveyed the teachings in any way, or conveyed the teachings in a way that's confusing or whatever, or I've harmed anyone in any way with what I've said, I ask for forgiveness. Well, I haven't said thank you yet. Thank you for your wise attention. And may we all rejoice in the merits made from listening to Dharma. Thank you.